Make a beginning. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Loving God, we thank you for these days of grace. Open our minds and our hearts that we might receive any word that you would have us receive this night, that we might savor it as Our Lady savored your word, even in her womb, and that we might live it to the greater glory of God. Amen. Noting, I've got a great story about a true story about an Irish priest in Australia who, when he arrived in this new parish called Bundaberg in Queensland, he couldn't get over that there were two things he didn't like about the habits that had got going. One was Mass never started on time, and that drove him nuts. And secondly, everyone sat at the back. So this was after the Second Vatican Council, and he was trying to encourage everybody to come forward and to sit at the front. And so they wouldn't do it. He invited them week after week, but they kept sitting at the back where they'd sat for most of their lives. So they all arrived to find this one Sunday he'd cordoned off all the back part of the church. So what did these wonderful people do? They just lifted the cord and sat where they'd sat. The following week, he had another idea, and he decided to build a jungle halfway down the church, so that if you sat on that side at the back, all you could see were trees. And he came out and said, "The Lord be with you," and the trees said, "And also with you." But the following week, he had his best idea still. So he was all in his vestments at the back door, welcoming them all and saying, "Oh, it's wonderful you're here. Fill up from the back. I want you to fill up from the back." And they thought, "Oh, he's never said that before. Something's wrong. This is not right." "Oh, no, don't go to the front. I want you to fill up from the back. Everybody is to fill up from the back." And then at exactly when the last person arrived for Mass, he then went to the side and he put the altar on wheels and wheeled it down. And then said, "In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit," and turned to the first crowd and said, "Now you know what it's like to be in the front row." Well, we're like that too. Thank you so much for your wonderful response and for coming tonight, maybe bringing a friend. If it's your first time, you're very welcome, and I hope you'll be engaged by it. A person isn't here tonight, and I won't say her name, but I got the most wonderful email today of someone who bought What Does It All Mean last night and started reading it when she went home. She said, "I almost caused a divorce." Now, not because there's anything that could possibly cause a breakup of a marriage, but she said once she started it, she couldn't stop. So her husband at 2 o'clock in the morning said, "Oh, for goodness sake, can you do that tomorrow?" And she said, "You're a lot more interesting than this. This book's a lot more interesting than you. Roll over and go back to bed." So she said, "I think you've caused a divorce in my life." But anyway, didn't mean to do that, but I'm pleased she found the book engaging. For those of you who are going to Congress, I just wanted to give you a little heads up. If you put down to go to my workshop on Saturday, which is Will Our Faith Have Young People, I was asked by Congress to speak to the issue of the Synod and young people, which I pretty well presented last night. There are going to be a few differences because of where we are at Anaheim and because of that group, but I'd just like you to know that. So if you need to bail out of that and go and see Ronald Rollheiser or Jim Martin or someone, please do that. I'd hate you to turn up at 3 o'clock on Saturday and say, "I've heard all this before." So you haven't heard it all before, but it will be largely before. What I want to do tonight is stay with the theme that the Holy Father has challenged the entire church with about our young people, and especially the context, both which they dominantly come out of, but we all come out of, and also that we're all on mission to. So the Lord sends us all out to proclaim and live the good news, not in the world to which we'd prefer to go, but to the world that is. And that world these days is media saturated. In fact, they say these days that there are three big influences on a young person, and indeed on all of us. There's obviously our family, our schooling, and the media. We put a lot of time and challenge, I think, into thinking and unpacking family life and family values, and so we should. We certainly put a lot of time and money into schooling, but the last one, I'm not sure. We know it matters, but I'm not sure we reflect on it as systematically as we could. So what I'm going to do tonight is try and unpack some of that and what our response is out of the life of the church. What we see is not what we get. Let me tell you an apocryphal story. Pope John Paul II had just finished a tour of the United States of America, and he got to the very final day, and the tour had gone so well that the President of the United States sent a brand new presidential Cadillac to take the Pope back to the airport for him to fly back to America. Now, back to the Vatican. What you might not know about the late Holy Father is he was a bit of a spannerhead. He loved his cars. It's an apocryphal story. So he goes up to the chauffeur of the car and says, I want to get behind the wheel just to see what this vehicle can do on the way to the airport. And he said, I'm sorry, Your Holiness, I'm not just your chauffeur, I'm also a Secret Service agent. It would be a dreadful breach of your security to allow you to drive your own car. And the Pope looked at him and said, are you a Roman Catholic? And he said, yes, I think everybody on your security delegation is a Catholic. He said, good, then as the Pope of the Catholic Church, I order you to get in the back. I'm taking the wheel. Well, the driver didn't think he had much of a choice. So he gets in behind, the Pope takes the wheel, and off to the airport they go. When they get to the freeway, the Pope decides to put his foot flat to the floor just to see what this vehicle can do, and whoosh, off it goes. Soon enough, sure enough, the trooper light is up beside and beckoning him over. Gets off the bike, takes one look at who's behind the wheel and says, excuse me, Your Holiness, I'm going to have to call in about this one. Asks for the chief. Chief, you are not going to believe who I've just pulled over. Oh, it's not the mayor. No, sir, more important than the mayor, tell me you have not pulled over the governor. No, sir, more important than the governor, tell me, trooper, you have not pulled over our president. To which the trooper comes back and says, no, sir, more important than our president. To which a great question comes back, who, trooper, can be more important than our president? To which the trooper says, I don't know, sir, but he's got the Pope as his chauffeur. What you see is not what you get. And right at the moment, here are some facts about the media culture in the United States. And they're pretty well, here we go. Adults, they're pretty well similar to Australia, by the way, just almost identical. US adults watch 3 hours and 13 minutes of television a day. That's not hard to do. Come home 6 o'clock, turn off the telly at 9:13, there's the daily average. But if you're born right now and get to your 70th birthday and you've done that really easy average, you've spent 9 years in front of the television. 9 whole years watching the television. When people say the television is an idiot box or they think it's unimportant, well, I don't like everything on it, but I take it very, very seriously because it forms a culture. It forms it very significantly. The internet, of course, is where younger people are. 10 to 25-year-olds in the United States do 2.5 hours a day away from school, 2.5 hours a day. And that means they've done over 7 years online, if they were to keep that up, by their 70th birthday. 81% of all US homes now have 2 televisions. Start counting. Hands up if you've got 2 or more at home. Oh, we could be at a Catholic charismatic prayer meeting. Love you, Jesus. Hallelujah. 65% have 3 or more. So once upon a time, we used to, have one television in the house and we'd all have to watch it communally. But now people actually move through the house to watch television in different ways and in different stations. And that's a very different viewing experience. And last year, 1.23 billion movie tickets were sold in the United States. You're the second biggest movie industry and indeed tenders, audiences in the world. Of course, the largest movie industry is Bollywood. And they, in fact, have, that's nothing in comparison to how many people in India go to the cinema. It's bigger than Hollywood, but obviously for obvious reasons to do with language and other things and culture, those films don't move around the world. And they've got a big enough audience that they don't have to. They can make a fortune there. So that's just a little snapshot. But even getting all the facts clear, let's have a look at what we watched last year. Here are the top films for the United States last year. We're going to have a look at the top films, the top television programs, and the internet sites. So the top 10 films last year, the number 1 was Star Wars, The Last Jedi. Number 2 was Beauty and the Beast, Wonder Woman, Guardian of the Galaxy Volume 2, Jumanji, Spider-Man, Homecoming, IT, Thor, Despicable Me 3, and Justice League, and Logan was number 11. Then we go over to the Fast and Furious. I think that was number 6 or 7. We've had a lot of those. Coco, which won the Oscar. Dunkirk. Get Out, the Lego Batman movie, The Boss Baby, Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Men Tell No Tales, Kong, Skull Island, Cars 3, War of the Planet of the Apes, Spilt, Wonder, Transformers: The Last Night, and The Greatest Showman. So one of the things I'd like you to note there is how many are science fantasy. Now think about this from a Catholic or Christian point of view. Young people may not be coming to church or organised religion in the way they used to, but they can't get enough of other worlds, other modes of existence, other forms of being, metaphysics, metaethics, souls, spirits, and angels. This is not a new phenomenon. Since about 1968, we've had extraordinary other worlds and other modes of being at the cinema. Metaphysics, metaethics, all of these big questions of spirituality. And so the big thing in the cinema now is science fantasy. If you do an analysis of that top 25, 11 are science fantasy films. So we've got the biggest story in town about this world and the next. We talk about spirits and souls and other beings and other modes of existence and heaven and hell and purgatory. We've got an extraordinary otherworld story to tell. And yet, young people will go and lap all that up at the cinema, but not find necessarily our language or indeed some of our concepts what they might find engaging. So I want us to think about that. It's not as though young adults, young people are not interested in big questions. They are, but somehow we're not touching them, engaging them, or at least some of them anyway, in the way that we might like to. Now let's have a look at television, because it's instructive as well. I found this fascinating because you are a bit different to us Australians in this regard. The Super Bowl, not a surprise there, is it? 111 million people watch the Super Bowl. Then we go to the Packers versus the Patriots, President Trump's State of the Union address, the Steelers versus the Patriots, the Packers versus the Falcons, the Giants versus the Packers, the Steelers versus the Chiefs. By the way, I haven't got a clue who any of those are. This is total. I know they're all gridiron. I know they're American football. Then we go to the Oscars, and then the president's inauguration, and then the president's Afghanistan address. That did pretty well on television. Then we head over to, we'll keep going here until it flicks over. There we go. The Dolphins versus the Steelers, the Grammy Awards, The Big Bang Theory, Good Doctor, This Is Us, NCIS, Young Sheldon, CBS Thursday Night Football, what a surprise that came back, Bull, NBC Thursday Night Football, and I didn't know that CBS and NBC both have football programs, but apparently they do. Then we do Sunday night pre-kick game. I assume that's before the football. And then we head over to, on the next page, New Orleans, NCIS, The Voice, OT, Grey's Anatomy, Will and Grace, and The Voice on Tuesday, and Dancing with the Stars. I think that rounds out the 30th. Does anybody get the sense that the football's big business on television in the United States? It really is. It is in Australia as well, but that's quite extraordinary how dominant it actually is in your television watching. And then the third group I want to have a look at are the most visited websites in the United States last year. Firstly, Google, no surprises there. Facebook, Yahoo, MSN, YouTube, Twitter, Microsoft, AOL, Wikipedia, Apple, Ask Search Network, Amazon. And the last, just out of the top 10 is a pornography site, and the fastest growing I discovered is dating. Dating websites in the United States and in Australia have gone from being well down the list to being up in the top 20 now. And how I know that's true is that when once upon, like in 5 or 6, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, you'd say to a couple who were getting married, how did you meet when I meet them to do their wedding? And they would say, we met online, as though that was terrible and awful to meet online. Now they say, we met on a dating site. I don't see what the problem is in meeting online, by the way, because what's the difference between that and meeting in a nightclub at 2 a.m. in the morning? Like, why does that become a better place to meet? There's nothing wrong with meeting online, But it does tell us that for some younger people, and maybe for some older ones too, meeting people who share our values, meeting somebody who you want to be with, that's actually getting increasingly difficult. And so dating websites, if they're reputable and good and they're not exploitative in any way, they can in fact be very, very helpful in helping people meet. Catholics, of course, have had this for years. I don't know whether you've ever seen Catholic newspapers that had this, but in Australia we always had a Catholic Lonely Hearts column. You know, young man looking for active Catholic, says the rosary and loves benediction. Please apply. So we've always had a Lonely Hearts column in lots of Catholic magazines trying to put together Catholic dating. And so we've had Catholic dating agencies for years, I'd have to say. So dating is the fastest growing on the internet right now. Now, I want to say a word about Google. Do you know, they say, it's claimed in a book by a former Google executive that Google knows more about the world than the CIA. Now, that'd probably be a pretty big claim, but Google knows where you've been. They know, or they at least know where your computer's been. Every IP address is independent, it's individual. And so they know where you've been, they know what you're doing, they know what you look at. They keep your searches against your phone, laptop, tablet, or desktop for 18 months. You're all just thinking of your searches right now. They're logged and stored and kept. And as you know, there's a lot of fights going on at the moment between Homeland Security in your country and the Home Office in my country of how much access government should be able to get to those for people who would do us harm. So, and they're very serious things that we need to really think about in terms of privacy on one regard and access to information that can keep us all safe on the other. I want to be back to pornography. We talked about sexuality last night, but it would be negligent not for us to talk about it again tonight. So it's a really complex world in which there are some good things there, and yet there are some complex things as well. So out of our Catholic tradition, what can we do about all of this? Well, the first thing is what we can't do. We cannot bail out. People who say, oh, that's all too much, I don't like any of that, and, you know, I'd prefer not to have anything to do with that, and I'd just say my prayers and hope to get to heaven. Well, good luck, but that's got nothing to do with what Jesus told us to do in regards to the world. He didn't say just stay at home saying your prayers, getting yourself to heaven. He told us to get off our backside and go out to the world and live and proclaim the good news, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And everyone who heard the Great Commission in Matthew 28, we say, by tradition died a martyr's death. The idea that this is going to be easy or pleasant or nice is as misplaced as it is dangerous. We are meant to be people who go out to the world, as complex as it is and media saturated as it might be right now. Let me tell you a story about bailing out. It may not come as a surprise to some of you to learn that one of the few people to get off the Titanic before it set sail across the Atlantic Ocean was a Jesuit priest. This is an absolutely true story. Father Frank Brown finished his theological studies in England in 1912, and his uncle, Robert Brown, was the very wealthy Bishop of Cloyne in Ireland. And as a gift to his nephew, his Jesuit priest nephew, he sent him a first-class ticket on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. Now, most of us think that Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet got on that boat and then went and met the iceberg. But if you know anything about the Titanic's actual story, it went from Southampton in England, then it went to Cherbourg in France, then it came around to what was then called Queenstown, which is now called Cobh in County Cork, and it was actually from Ireland that the Titanic left on its incredibly tragic voyage across the Atlantic. That trip took 2 days, England to France to Ireland, or just under 2 days. While on board in first class, Father Brown was befriended by a very wealthy American family, and they offered to pay the young priest's fare all the way through to New York and all the way back so he could have the whole Titanic experience. He went to the now famous Marconi room on that boat and sent a telegram to his provincial superior, his boss, in Dublin, asking for permission to accept the offer. Some of us remember how short telegrams used to be. You paid by the letter. Soon enough, sure enough, a telegram came back to the boat from his provincial superior in Dublin. I've seen this in the Irish Jesuit archives myself. It simply says this: "Get off ship." Father Brown was one of 14 passengers to disembark in the Cork harbour, and he took the last known photographs of the Titanic as it disappeared on the horizon. His brother worked for Kodak in 1912, and as an ordination gift, his older brother gave him a box brownie. Some people remember the box brownie, and rolls of free Kodak film. And Father Brown, in 2 days, took 196 photographs of the working ship of the Titanic. They were the only ones that survived the crossing. Every other piece of film, of course, was destroyed by the waters within a tragically short period of time. So Father Brown sat there, broken-hearted that he wasn't on that ship, and took the last known photographs of the Titanic as it disappeared on the horizon, and they're now incredibly eerie to see that. When James Cameron came to make his very famous and Oscar-winning film Titanic, they were the only photographs of the working ship, lots before, and a few on the seafloor after, but the only ones were Father Brown's photographs. So he paid the Irish Jesuits $24 million to the rights to those photographs. Do you know what I've done? I've given every Australian Jesuit a box brownie, a lot of rolls of film, and so said, go shoot the hell out of the whole damn place. Because we have no idea where we're going to make money out of you, living or dead. Father Brown carried that telegram in his coat pocket until the day he died in 1960. And he was apparently fond of holding it aloft during sermons and speeches and addresses by saying, "This telegram proves that holy obedience can save a man's life." Now, taking his exit from that liner as a metaphor, we should not judge it a great thing if we could bail out of our cultural ship. Whether you and I like it or not, and especially our young people, we are up to our heads in a media-saturated culture. And rather than get resentful, let's get clever. Because the Lord gave us 3 things. He gave us the lifeboat of hope. People who want to bail out of our cultural ship, I'm not sure, have quite understood the resurrection. Since the first Easter Sunday, we are always people of hope. This is the Lord's work. The Lord will see it done. We help, we'll do our best, but we are hopeful people. Secondly, we have the life jacket of sane thinking. I'm a Jesuit. We like tidy thinking. Let's think this through. Don't get frightened, get clever. That's the better way to be. And finally, of course, we have the opportunity to discern where the Spirit is drawing us. The Holy Spirit has not abandoned the church and is guiding us still. So, what would be a Catholic response to a media-saturated culture where minds and hearts are won and lost? Well, if you think you've come to a trendy Jesuit workshop, let's go back to the 12th century to arguably the greatest theologian in the church's history, St. Thomas Aquinas, to the most important book he wrote, the Summa Theologica, Book 2, Part 2, if you want to go home and look it up. It's fairly complex reading, but he's worth it when you get there. He's extraordinary. Thomas knew nothing about modern culture, but he had plenty to say about the cardinal virtues and the Christian values. Thomas says that wherever there is justice, fidelity, self-care, prudence, mercy and hospitality, then Christ is present, named or not. For us to like a piece of media, it does not have to quote the Pope, who was elected 5 years this very day, Pope Francis. It doesn't have to mention our Lord or Our Lady, and it doesn't have to mention a saint. It doesn't have to be explicitly religious for us to like it. If it's talking justice, fidelity, self-care, prudence, mercy and hospitality, then Thomas says it's already singing our song whether they know it or not. Why does that matter? A good number of Catholic adults, parents and some teachers in schools quickly become defined by what they don't like. They're against everything. Well, I'm against a number of things. But the Easter story tells me I've got to be for a few things too. And I'm for justice, fidelity, self-care, prudence, mercy, and hospitality wherever it is, online, in a film, in a television program, in a book. Wonderful. So it's not all bad, and we need to be fairly careful of always being boxed into being people who are only critical of culture. Secondly, we're not idiots. We don't dismiss the vices and the deadly sins. Thomas Aquinas didn't invent the 7 deadly sins, but he did bring them together into one coherent group. I love the 7 deadly sins: pride, greed, envy, anger, lust, gluttony, and sloth. I want to bring back the word sloth. Isn't that a wonderful word? For those of us who are old English teachers, it's onomatopoeic. It's exactly the way you would expect it to sound. My grade 3 teacher, teaching the 8-year-olds, the Sister of Mercy, she was an Irish woman called Sister Mary St. Benedict. Sister Mary St. Benedict was 6 foot tall, and with all that old regalia that the nuns used to wear, she looked even taller. Behind her back, we called her Gigantor, and Gigantor loved the word sloth. She used to say, "You lot are the most slothful bunch I've had the misfortune to teach in the 27 years I've been teaching in Australia so far. I've never known sloth like I know it in this classroom right now. And if you don't stop the sloth, you'll be going to hell for eternity." Johnny Davis was my best friend in grade 3. He turned to me and he said one day, "What's sloth?" And I said, "I don't know, but we've got to stop doing it or we're going to go to hell." We didn't even know what it was. Now, in context, Sister was saying that we were lazy. That's not the best word for sloth. The better word for sloth is apathy. And Francis Burke, Edmund Burke, the great political philosopher in 1770, said it better than anyone: "Evil reigns when good people do nothing." Evil reigns when you and I do nothing. What we walk past, we permit. What we walk past, we permit. Well, back to Aquinas. He didn't think that they were the worst sins you could commit, but he was very insightful. He thought people got trapped there. This is actually really clever for Lent. Think about those: pride. Oh, I didn't give them to you, should have. Pride, greed, envy, anger, lust, gluttony, and sloth. People get trapped there. If you're feeling entrapped by any of those this Lent, then Lent's a time to get free of them. Thomas Aquinas noticed that people were trapped, and that's what made them deadly. The problem with the media is that they can present these to all of us, and especially our young people, as glamorous and normal. There's nothing deadly about them. Like, don't forgive anybody, get even. Have you noticed how many films, television programs, and websites are now hell-bent on retribution? And we wonder why the world's in a mess. We wonder why our kids don't forgive. They want to get even, because every second film, every 4th television program, and an increasing number of websites are about retribution. This is not a healthy way for us to live, and it's having a bad impact. The 7 deadly sins are never glamorous, and they're not normal. That's what the sacrament of penance is about, the season of Lent, to a lesser degree the season of Advent. I don't have to be trapped by the deadly sins. I can pick myself up with God's grace, dust myself down, and with God's love, turn around, metanoia, to be converted into living the life God intends all of us to have. So let's praise what we can and stand over what we must in our culture. If any bit of media tells any of us or our young people that the 7 deadly sins are glamorous and normal, unapologetically, we have to say against it, speak against it. And let's deal with the community, the society as it is and not as we'd prefer it to be. The longing for community. Do you know that they've done an analysis of a whole lot of programs that young people watch, and family life is very often not portrayed positively. They're screaming and yelling, they're divorcing, they're angry, and they talk about the urban family. Who are the urban family in American sitcoms or American dramas or Australian sitcoms or Australian dramas? They're the peer group. It's where the peer group is raised to a level where they take on almost the same importance as the family. Let me give you an example. Who here watched at least one episode of the smash US comedy hit Friends? Watched at least one episode at one stage. Did you notice that there were no photographs of families on the wall? Not one. They lived in those apartments for years and years, and they don't have a single photograph of the family. Now, when I went through the Master of Fine Arts through the London Film School, we were told in production class, don't put family photographs on the wall of television series, or films for that matter, because if you need the brother, the sister, the father, the mother to come into the storyline, you're going to have to hire the actor you've got up on the wall. So leave them out so you can hire who you can and need when and if the time comes. The problem is that these young people in this sitcom, and sometimes a drama, go through the most colossal things and the family's completely absent. Who's there? The peer group. Now, don't hear me getting worked up about one episode of Friends, but I know people who watched it for years and years and years in very, very vulnerable ages. But the same is true of The Simpsons. Now, The Simpsons is a mixed blessing for Christians. I think about 70% of it is pretty good. I think it's consonant with our values. 15% of it would really need unpacking for an adult to a child. And I think 15% of The Simpsons is objectionable, at least from a Catholic or Christian point of view. But that said, they never made The Simpsons for kids. The producers and writers of The Simpsons, just because it's animation doesn't mean it's for kids, but because it was an animation, a whole lot of parents put their children in front of it thinking it would be all okay. Well, most of it is. But I have a friend of mine who did his PhD in cultural studies, and his topic was the portrayal of authority figures in The Simpsons. Do you know, he had to watch 500 episodes of The Simpsons. Some people earn their PhD, and he could prove that in 84% of those 500 episodes, that they had the teacher, the police, the local mayor, mum and dad at home, the emergency services, the union official, the employer at work. How were they portrayed? In 84% of the situations, they were presented as likable idiots. Who were the wisdom figures in The Simpsons? The kids. Which, if you're growing up and you're 6 to 13, a hell of a lot of 6 and 10-year-olds watch The Simpsons and still do. That's a value formation where you get a whole lot of series of messages about peer groups and adults, and I think a quite wrong attitude to sometimes how children run a house. Do you know, I think sometimes we over-invest in like a child deciding all sorts of things. Now, don't get me wrong, I think sometimes kids should decide things. It's good for their responsibility. But I know family homes, I absolutely know family homes, where if a child says, I don't want to do it, the family will change their plans. That wasn't true of my family, I'd have to say. My mother would say, well, I don't care what you want, this is what we are doing. And we get in the car and off we'd go. You know, it's like I know that when there are young people at Mass every Sunday, or certainly Mass at Christmas, I know that some of them are there as unwilling conscripts. But that doesn't really worry me, because we do things as families. And we ask, the kids' agenda and the kids' desire is not the only one. But there is a whole media package out there now that I think overplay the card. Not of the rights of children, their rights are absolutely paramount, but of the opinions and of the determinative value of that opinion. Let me tell you a story of one of the most extraordinary moments of an adolescent I've ever seen. I get invited to people's homes for dinner, and last year I was invited to this beautiful, I married them 16 years ago. They have a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, and an 8-year-old. Beautiful family, I love them. And but the 15-year-old is going, as a lot of 15-year-old girls do, is going through a bit of a complex period. She's really beautiful and she's got a lovely figure, but she thinks she's fat and she's ugly, and so food's become a bit of an issue. So there are real issues here. But she was sitting next to Mum at dinner, and I was down the other end next to Dad. And she was playing with the food, not eating it, and Mum was just saying to her, come on, darling, you love this. I cooked this because I know you enjoy this. Eat it up, it won't hurt you, come on. No, she's playing with it. And this escalated, and eventually the mother said to the daughter, there are children in Africa who would love that meal. It used to be India in my day, but now it's children in Africa who'd love that meal. What did that girl do? She jumped up and ran out of the room, and I thought, well, that's it. We'll never see her again. No, I was totally wrong. She was back 5 minutes later with a big white envelope on which she had put the starving children of Africa. She picked up the envelope, tipped in the food, licked it, and said, send it to them, and walked out. Do you know there's a moment in every priest's life where you say, is that the time? Oh my goodness, I've got Mass at 4 a.m. tomorrow morning, I'm going to have to go. And I'm grateful to that girl because all the way home I thanked God for celibacy. I have no idea what I'd do with that kid. I don't know. Like, I want to be terribly compassionate to her because of the situation she's going through. So let's be just conscious of the longing for community. The second one is sexuality. We talked about it last night, but I do want to just talk about pornography. Pornography has exploded online now. It's worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. It is so readily accessible. And running away from this, if you thought you were coming to a mission where we weren't going to deal with the real world, well, not my missions, I can tell you. Because we've got a serious problem now. We have people who are addicted to pornography. It is now an identifiable, diagnosable addiction. Don't take my word for it. The Illinois Center for the Study of Addictions at the University of Illinois is the place in the world that studies addictive behavior, obsessive-compulsive disorder. And 2 years ago, they put pornography down as an identifiable, diagnosable addiction. We have people who just can't stop. And they're not all young, by the way. It's a misnomer to think they're all young men. They're dominantly young men, it must be admitted. But I think we have to really think this one through, because we have a very major problem right now. What's our response? We talked about it last night. The word dignity is our response. It's a gift given by God to enable us to flourish in the world, our sexuality, but we have to treat it with great responsibility and care, because we claim dignity for ourselves and we give dignity to people who don't claim it for themselves. We've always done that in the Christian tradition, and we need to do it here. Body image, we've talked about this just now, but body image is really a huge issue now. And you know, when people aren't coming to Mass on Sunday, do you know where they go in the United States and Australia? I checked this before I got here. Gym participation goes up by 226% in your country and 196% on my country on Sunday morning. So we go off to a temple, all right, we're worshipping, but we're worshipping the body. Bodies matter. You know, I love our funerals. I absolutely love Catholic funerals. Do you know why? Because we respect the body. We didn't know the person as a spirit, as an idea. We respect the body, so we bow, we incense it, we say prayers around it. It's there, present often, particularly at Requiem Masses. And I love that. We take the body seriously. But here's the big distinction for Catholics. We're called to care for the body, not worship it. And my problem right at the moment with the media culture is it's confusing those two. I'm called to care for my body, whether you exercise or not, whether you carry weight or not, whether you take the drugs you're supposed to take or take drugs you're not supposed to take, whether we drink too much, whether we get enough sleep. All of these things contribute to our health care. Well, we're meant to care for the body, not worship it. On television, these money and leisure shows have just exploded. And it's incredible. Now, let's get clear. Money is value neutral. I said this last night. What you do with it tells me who you are. Jesus says in Luke chapter 9, where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. Do you know, I love the moment, well, I find it moving more than love it. I find it very moving when there's a catastrophe like a fire or a flood or a hurricane or a tornado, and they're interviewing survivors. And you know, some wonderful people in your country and mine will say, we've lost everything, but at least we've got each other. Where your treasure is, there your heart will also be. That's right. We've lost everything, but we've got what matters. We've got each other. I'm always touched by that. And now we're promised that you've got to get rich, and you've got to get rich quickly. That's a problem. That's a problem. Because often it comes through making money too quickly for our own good. Now, I want to tell you a quick story about my uncle and aunt. When my uncle and aunt got married in 1954, they loved telling anybody who will listen, they couldn't afford a honeymoon, a car, or a refrigerator. Now, we couldn't imagine anybody getting married now who doesn't have a refrigerator, a honeymoon, and a car. Don't hear me being anti-refrigeration. I'm all for fridges. I think they're very good things. Their point was that they took a cut in their standard of living when they left their parents' home, and they lived with their parents until they got married, took a cut in their standard of living and slowly thought that they would have a better standard of living. In their case, they founded a construction company and become very wealthy people. They noticed when their children went to get married or leave home, they not only wanted to go out at exactly the same standard of living, they wanted to increase their standard of living. So we don't have this sense that we're going to go back to come forward. We've got to go back out at the same level or up a bit, and we're going to keep growing and growing and growing. Not too bad, but there are two problems. The politics of desire. Do you know, we're told the more stuff you have, the better it will be. But just think about technology. We were told that if you had a whole lot of technology, you'd have a whole lot of leisure. We've got an extraordinary amount of technology. I'm not sure we've got a lot of leisure, because you take people home, you take people take work home, and they spend an enormous amount of time for it. Also, connected to that is very limited delayed gratification. So saying no and meaning it, and that we are, in fact, people who can put off what we desire and what we want to know. Do you know, when I was in my second last year at school, I was doing French, and the Irish Christian Brothers arranged an excursion to New Caledonia for the seniors to go off to practice their French in a French-speaking country. And I went home with the form for my mother, and Mum read it through, and then she looked at the price and she said, "Oh no, we can't afford that, you're not going." And my father had died when I was very young, so Mum was it. The next day I went back and had another go, and I said, "Mum, you know, I'd really like to go to New Caledonia." And Mum said, "What was it about yesterday that led you to believe this was going to be a 3-act opera, not a 1-act play?" It was no yesterday, it's no today. And just in case you're deciding it's going to be having a 3rd act tomorrow, it'll be no tomorrow. The answer is no. And I let out that great adolescent cry, "I'll be the only kid in the class." To which my mother said, "Good, get used to it. You're going to have to do a lot of things in your life as an adult on your own." Without a care in the world. My generation of parenting, they can't be the only kid in the class. We're going to have to find the money. So the politics of desire, that we need it all now, and we can't put anything off. That becomes highly problematic. It also is about a culture of excess. More is better. Who here, like me, has done a cruise? Who's ever done a cruise? Yes. Isn't it amazing that those boats don't sink? Like, if ever we needed examples of excess, then the amount of food that people eat is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a wowser. I like to eat and I like to drink and I like to have a good time. But piling on food, of course, again, it's addictive behaviour and it's medicating. Food is now a medication that we use to try and make ourselves feel better when we're in a bit of pain. So I don't like smorgasbords, I don't like buffets, simply because I always think I've got to get my money's worth, and I often end up eating far too much. I think your culture and mine are now gorging. We're gorging because we can't work out what is enough, what is sufficient, because we keep thinking more has to be better of everything. And I think we're paying a huge price for it. And the media is absolutely exploiting it. Luke 14 is the answer to this. Those to whom much has been given, much will be required. Your country and mine are two of the 25 most wealthy countries in the world. You're the wealthiest. Well, the Lord says to us, those to whom much has been given, much will be required. And having a different lifestyle. These lifestyle programs on television, the cooking shows, dating, travel, home improvement shows, whole dedicated channels now to these things. Nothing wrong with it in theory, but in practice, I think it changes our values. For instance, we've never had smaller families. We've never built bigger houses. Isn't that interesting? And then, the number one selling product in a US home, as in an Australian home, a new kitchen. We've never ripped out kitchens like we're ripping them out right now and putting in new kitchens. Good for the resale value of the house, don't get me wrong, I understand that. I've just done that in our Jesuit rectory in North Sydney, actually. We've got a new kitchen. But when we watch the cooking shows, we didn't say, oh my goodness, I must cook that souffle for the family tomorrow night. We say, what range, what tops, what benches, Miele, Fisher and Paykel. Harry, we're getting a new kitchen. The day we finish the new kitchen that night to celebrate, we go out for dinner. And the next night we get in takeout. But without question, where the lifestyle thing comes into my life is every Saturday at weddings. Weddings. Do you know how much the average US wedding now costs? Average, $49,000. Who here has 3 daughters or more, please? Hands up. Can we take up a collection for these people, please? Do you know, and in my country it's $46,000, in your country it's $49,000. And guess what? The priest is not the expensive item on the day, I can assure you. Now, clearly, if I was in the priesthood for the money, I would be seriously deluded person. But it is very interesting what you spend your $49,000 on. Mind you, I have been given I'm often between 2 bowls of flowers that cost more than I do. That's $400 and that's $200, and I'm lucky if I get $20 and a kind smile. But the best one I ever got was last year. Someone gave me a card that said, "Dear Father Leonard, please thank you for doing our wedding. We couldn't have done it without you," which is sort of strictly true. And then they said, "Please find enclosed a token of our appreciation." Do you know what was inside? A Scratchem ticket. A $2 Scratchem ticket, which had been scratched. I got a dud Scratchem ticket. Now, I'm assumed that they made a mistake. But, weddings. Imagine if your bride and groom turned up to the mother and father on either side and said, "We've announced our engagement to be married," and mum and dad say, "Oh, darling, we want to do your wedding in a very simple, low-key way." You don't love me. You've never loved me. You don't love me at all. Because somehow we've got very confused that the amount of money on offer is the amount of love on offer. Actually, some of the finest weddings I've ever been proud and honoured to do have been the simplest, where people just said, "We don't want to go that way." But sometimes we've got to be very big and grand for our family and friends. We've got to pay an awful lot of money. And we now have people in your country and mine who have to go into debt. Some mortgage their house to pay for a wedding. As a priest at a sacrament, that breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to think we would have a sacrament where people are in debt. I think I told you these stories a couple of years ago, but I used to sing at weddings before I became a priest. And, without question, the funniest thing I was ever asked to sing was that bride who in the early 1980s wanted that hit song out of Jesus Christ Superstar, "I don't know how to love him," to which I used to say, "If you don't, you shouldn't be here." And think of the rest of the chorus, "And I've had so many men before." Now we're talking in very many ways. He's just one more. I don't think that's what we want to say at weddings. I really don't. Now, don't get me wrong. I think weddings are very, very important. I think they're great moments. But if we're hocking our house, going into debt, or we're anxious about a $50,000 wedding, then as Catholics and Christians, we have to challenge that culture. We have to find a way of doing this in a wonderful way, which is a lot more simple. We talked about sex. Well, we better talk about violence. And, can we stop saying that if you watch violent material, you'll become a violent person? I know every one of the 27 violence in media studies that are going on in the world right now. One of them's been going for 35 years. I know every one of those studies and I follow them. There isn't a single evidence that shows that young people, if they watch violent material or play violent video games as a young person, they become a violent person. It is exactly the same as saying if you watch Westerns, you'll become a cowboy. It's exactly the same logic. What we can prove is the single biggest contributor to a violent adult is growing up in a domestically violent house. Now, I know that media violence has its role. I'm not letting it off the hook. Don't hear me do that. But some people want to say it's all the media's fault. Oh, if we didn't have these violent programs, then you wouldn't have kids going in and shooting up other kids in schools. The violence in your society and mine is unbelievably complex. And it's been growing and growing and growing and growing. What we walked past, we permitted. The single largest factor in growing up, of becoming a violent adult, is growing up in a domestically violent house. For my money, I want to focus on two other things. Do you know language is one of them? What we now accept on television, film, and radio in terms of swearing and cussing is dramatically different to anything before. And when the nuns, brothers and priests had some of us in our schooling, and they'd hear a child swearing in the playground, sister, brother, father, and all the lay teachers would go up and say, "Would you use language like that at home?" Utterly confident of the reply. Do you think teachers do that anymore? Because it's completely changed. The way that some parents speak to their children is quite violently. See, it's wrong to think that swearing, cuss language, is in fact a sin against decorum. It is that. But it's a violent action. To swear is a really violent thing to do. And so we now have verbal abuse. And you can actually charge someone. They can be charged with verbally abusing people. And then the other two words that we have walked by and now therefore we are permitted was Jesus and Christ. I wouldn't be standing here if it wasn't for Jesus Christ, and you wouldn't be sitting there if it wasn't for Jesus Christ. But now on television and film and radio and even sporting people can talk about Christ this and Jesus that as though it's two other words in the language. They're not two other words in the language. They're the name by which we are saved. Do you know, sometimes people aren't even conscious that they even say it. I did the wedding of a guy that I taught at our Jesuit high school in Sydney. Now, he got married a bit later, so he was about 38. I did his wedding the year before last, and he was very happy with how it all went. But I was standing there outside the chapel on the day, and the wedding had gone well, and I walked up and congratulated him. And now he's an old boy of a Jesuit high school, and his groomsmen are all there with him. And he turned to me and he said, "Jesus, Father, you did a fantastic job for us. We're really grateful." And his best man and said, "You can't say that to a priest." And he said, "Oh, Christ, I'm sorry." He couldn't even hear himself. He couldn't hear himself. And it isn't about saying it in front of a priest. I don't think any of us should let people get away with this at work or here at home, because this is not any old name for us. I think it's a religiously violent thing to do. And I think there's a way that we've got to cultivate compassionate judgment and critical consumption as good Catholics, as good Christians. Do you know, I want us to throw out the phrase, "Don't judge." We shouldn't judge them, we can't judge them, we're in no position to judge, we shouldn't be judging anybody. This is rubbish. Jesus on every page of the New Testament judges people. How? Compassionately. Take the woman caught in adultery, John chapter 8. "Where are those who condemn you? Neither do I. Go and sin no more." There's a lot of judgment in the last phrase. When we try to say don't judge, I assume what we're trying to say is don't condemn. I'm in no position to condemn anybody. Absolutely none. But I've got to judge behaviour, and I have to judge what people say, whether it's right or wrong. Because the old line holds true: if you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. I want to say that again. If you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. So what I want to say to young adults is, sometimes you'll find us really traditional and conservative on some of the things we stand for, But that's because we stand for something, and not everything's okay just because they say it's okay and because the media tells you it's okay. I'm going to skip over that. And then finally, we want to become a good storyteller. And storytelling really matters. Jesus used stories all the time. And when our story is honoured, and when we honour other people by listening to our story, then indeed the media can play a really appropriate role in our Catholic and Christian life. Do you know, sometimes people say, Father, how can you possibly go and see all those violent and sexy movies at the cinema? I say, because I've read the Old Testament. Go and read the Old Testament. It's full of sex, it's full of violence. It really is, of every persuasion, I can assure you. So, but I value my story. And I hope you value your story too, because when your story is valued, the media can do what it does best. It can entertain us, it can engage us, it can extend us, it can make us laugh, it can make us cry, it can help us escape for a while. That's a perfectly acceptable thing to do every so often. It can enable us to see other worlds, other people, other ideas. And these are entirely appropriate. So I want to finish tonight by doing what I'm preaching and tell you a final wonderful story about going to a certain place wasn't the last word when we do it in faith, hope, and love. I've told you before that my first appointment as a priest was to the red light district of Sydney, to King's Cross. And I was a deacon there first for a year, and then I stayed on as the associate pastor. So we had women in prostitution, boys in prostitution, runaways, drug addicts, alcoholics, you name it, our parish had it. It was a very, very complex and wonderful parish. But I was there for a deacon, and then I got ordained on the 11th of December 1993, and I went back to my home state, the northern eastern seaboard state of Queensland in Australia, and I went home and said masses for various parishes and schools and places I'd been over the years. When I got back to King's Cross, now as a newly ordained priest, it was the 24th of December, and my Irish pastor, Donald Taylor, had put me on the midnight mass. He said, the people will be so excited to have the newly ordained priest on the midnight mass. They're just absolutely beside themselves with joy. What he didn't tell me was that while I was away, Esme, our 86-year-old sacristan, had gone all over Sydney to buy every metre of gold lame there was to buy to make me a new set of vestments for the occasion. So proud was she wanted me to have special vestments for this great occasion. The first time I ever knew about this was at about 20 before 12 when I arrived into the sacristy to get ready for midnight mass. Oh, by the way, people actually do call the Catholic rectory and ask, Father, what time is midnight mass? Isn't that tragic? Some parishes aren't helping, by the way. They say midnight mass : 10 p.m. That's not helping. But anyway, back to Esme. There she was to present the vestments. They were the most ridiculous looking things I have ever seen in my life. But I'm not breaking an 86-year-old's heart. I'm wearing those vestments whether I like it or not. So I put on the alb, and then I put on the gold lame, and I looked in the mirror, and I looked like a Christmas tree. You could have put lights around me and plugged me in, and I would have flashed. Midnight Mass was packed to the rafters, and by the way this Catholic congregation sang, it was clear they were full of more than one type of Christmas cheer. Silent night, holy night. Shortly after Mass began, 5 tall men, very imposing fellows, walked all the way down the aisle to only the pew that was left at that stage, which was the front, and it was very clear that only one of the 5 knew what to do at Mass: to stand, to kneel, to roll over, to die, all the things we do at Mass. We do, in fact, die with Christ in the Eucharist, but that's another story. After Mass was over, we were having drinks on the sidewalk, and we didn't have a parish hall at that stage, and so we had drinks on the sidewalk, and these guys stayed. So I went up to them, and I said, I'm still in all my vestments, and I said, hello, I'm Father Richard Leonard, I'm one of the Jesuit priests here. I've never seen you in our parish before, I don't think. I'd like to welcome you to Midnight Mass and wish you a very happy Christmas. And one of the 5 turned to me and said, Father, if you don't mind me saying so, you wear that frock divinely. And at that moment, I turned into the roughest, toughest cowboy priest in Australia. I don't get any kicks out of wearing this stuff, you know. I normally get straight back to the sacristy and get them off there. And as soon as I said that, I really wished I hadn't. It transpired that my 5 new parishioners were from the female impersonating show of lay girls. They're at 2 Roslyn Street, we're at 28 Roslyn Street. Well, that night, they'd done the late show, but as a Christmas special, they still had the late show to go at 3 o'clock. Mark, the only Catholic among them, had convinced his colleagues to get some religion and come down the hill at 3 o'clock at midnight before the 3 o'clock show. They'd enjoyed Mass so much, he encouraged me to get some of my fellow brother Jesuits and come up the hill at 3 o'clock. Seeing we came to your show, Father, you should come to ours. I declined the offer, but he said, in case you change your mind, there'll be free tickets for you. When I got back to the rectory, I was telling 4 visiting Jesuit seminarians, scholastics we say, the story of what had happened on the sidewalk, and it transpired that none of us had ever been to lay girls. Guess what happens next? We were late for their show too, but there were tickets for us at the back door. We were given a table at the back. We were served complimentary drinks. We had arrived late. I decided we'd be leaving early as well. St. Ignatius has plenty to say about things done in the dark, but we're not going there for the moment. Everything went along quite nicely. I never need to do a female impersonating show again as long as I live. But everything went along quite nicely until right at the end, about 4:30 in the morning, Mark went to, now in his Marcia persona, went to the microphone to wish everybody a happy Christmas. He told the audience that in between the 2 shows tonight, ladies and gentlemen, the girls had gone down to midnight Mass. And as a result, we'd like to welcome here tonight our Catholic priests. And then a spotlight came on the table. And I stood and waved to all my new parishioners. Oh, welcome to the parish. It's great to have you. Then it got worse. You couldn't think it could get worse. It got worse. Mark then said, Father Richard sang at midnight Mass, ladies and gentlemen. Father, you've got a lovely voice. Come up here on stage and lead the crowd in a rousing chorus of O Come All Ye Faithful. As I walked up between the tables up to the stage, all I could think of was, how am I going to explain this to the Cardinal Archbishop of Sydney, to my Jesuit provincial, my Irish Jesuit pastor, and worst of all, my mother when she finds out. But there I was, not ordained 3 weeks a Catholic priest, standing on the stage of a female impersonating show at 4:30 a.m. on Christmas morning 1993, leading a very dubious group of my compatriots in a rousing chorus of, Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Sing it with me. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. I think some of you are visiting Sydney. Within 6 months of that night, I'd buried 3 of the 5 men who came to Mass. The first took his own life in February. We had to break into his apartment in King's Cross to find him and the gun and more blood and gore than, please God, I'll ever see again as long as I live. They asked me to do his funeral because I was the only priest they knew and that was the only church he'd ever visited as an adult. The second guy died of a heroin overdose in the public toilets, and they again asked me to do his funeral. The fourth guy died of HIV/AIDS in the Sisters of Charity Sacred Heart Hospice. And you know, these are the stories you never find out about Catholic parishes. His family totally rejected him because he had HIV/AIDS, and I was really anxious that Craig was going to die alone. So I put out the word to our parish that would anybody like to be with me on a roster to make sure that he was in the last weeks of his life, that was certain, that he didn't die alone. All his family had abandoned him. Do you know we had 76 volunteers from my parish who took places at 2, 3 and 4 a.m. In fact, there were 2 of us on a Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. who commended him into the arms of a loving God. The fourth guy, he wanted to get out of King's Cross when his three friends died. So the Good Shepherd Sisters and the Jesuits, we sponsored him to relocate to another part of our state, and that was 1994. He was already baptized an Episcopalian, but I received him into the Catholic Church in 1996. I married he and his wife in 1998. I baptized her in 2000, and in 2003 I baptized their triplets. That kept the Pope a happy man. 3 in 1, that was great. And Mark, the only Catholic among them that very first night, who brought them down the hill that night, he and his gay partner now work with the Salvation Army in going out every single night at 10 p.m. and they work until dawn, 5 or 6 nights a week. And sometimes they come on Sunday morning to the first Mass in our parish at North Sydney. They're our parishioners now. And I must admit, I'm so proud to be their priest, because if Christ was in Sydney, chances are he would somewhat, I think, be wanting to be with people who are kids abandoned on the street. He'd want to say something to these kids and be with them. Now, there are some Catholics who think that those guys had no place coming down the hill to midnight Mass. Oh, isn't that dreadful, some people would say. They would certainly believe that the Jesuits had no place that night, of all nights, going up the hill to a female impersonating show. That is a disgrace. Wrong and wrong. Because the reason Christ and the Church and the Gospel touched these men's lives for the better wasn't just that they came to us, but that we took a couple of risks, maybe not even calculated risks when I look back on it, and went up the hill that night. And all I know is it gave 2 men options they and we couldn't have dreamt about for their life that night. And at least for the other 3 guys, it gave them the dignity of a Christian burial from a Catholic church. And if you want it, I think it's a dignity always worth having. When I think of us going out with our young people in a media-saturated culture, I think of that story. If we think that tonight what we've done is too much secular and not enough sacred, you're wrong. Do you know why? God has gone before us into the world. God is present in the world. We have to have the eyes to see it, the hearts to love it, and the courage to find it. For this is God's world, and God will save it. I don't think anything... No, hold on, I'm nearly finished. You can clap then. I don't think that anything we've looked at tonight is easy. But we have to deal with young people who are up to their necks in this stuff now, and we have to accompany them. So firstly, we have to know it. Secondly, we have to say what we're for and be positive about what we can. Thirdly, we unashamedly stand over and against what we think is wrong because it's wrong, and you telling me it's right doesn't make it so. But finally, we want to do it with a heart of compassion and love, because that's what Christ does for us. I don't think it's easy. I just think it's essential if we're on mission to the world right now. And why are we on that mission? Because one day the Lord is going to look at us and ask, "What did you do, good and faithful servant? With everything you got, what did you do for the reign of God in the world?" And hopefully that day we will look back and say, with everything we got, we did our best. And with the cloud of witnesses we will sing, "Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord." In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thanks very much.